All right. Uh, well, since this is just the first part of it is about me, I can fake that. I am a longtime member of the political science department here at Bowling Green, so I gotta rep the colors here. Most of the chair of the Department of Political Science at Adrian College. My focus throughout my career has been, and at least my academic career, has been on Europe, uh, specifically Georgia. I've spent a lot of time in the Republic of Georgia. Their fight for democracy, the challenges that they face, and the challenges they still face. They're not exactly in the best neighborhood. Their next door neighbor is a little annoying, so to speak. I was a journalist in a past life. I spent 30 years, covering the world, within the same room with popes and presidents. Really unique thing when you look over and you see Pope John Paul II, where you look over and you see Barack Obama. Makes you go, man, how did I get here? It's just a lot of imposter syndrome, that's for sure. And the most important stories I had were stories that connected with real people, that found the people behind these policies. And I think that's important to note in the day that we're at right now, because it's not easy for governments to make decisions based on the needs of the people. Sometimes they make it in the best needs of their contributors or their donors or themselves. And this is where we get into my passion project. I also work with the Global Food Institute at George Washington University. And if you know this man, Jose Andres, has worked with World Central Kitchen. Wherever there's a crisis, he's there. And the theory of the GFI is, if you're willing to have dinner with someone, if you're willing to break bread with someone, you're not likely to shoot them later. Unless the food is really bad, which could happen. But it's a strong policy statement that I think we all need to hear. Like to share some love today, but on this Valentine's Day, that's hard to find, especially in the world around us. I think you would all agree. Title of our session today is The Changing World Order. And I would think that we are dealing. What is the next 5 years to look like? What are we walking into right now? I have a colleague who's a fellow TED speaker from Talent, and he was talking about the challenges the world faces today. Are we at a hinge in history? And he was saying that in the time of the printing press, we had a massive change because information was brought out in a different way than never seen before. In today's world of cell phones and mobile phones and instant connections, it's kind of the same thing. What will technology do to the future? Will it help us? Will it hurt us? Will AI help us or hurt us? Can AI be the savior that we think it could be, or could it be our downfall? So we'll touch on some of those things. And I want to leave time at the end of this for your questions, because it's why you're here. I'm always willing to take any questions that you might have, because I think a dialogue really in this day and age is more important than ever. Over Christmas, I was in Switzerland, not too far from Davos. If you're a news consumer, you know that the World Economic Forum was held there just a few weeks ago. It made history for a number of reasons, the least of which was a speech given by the Canadian Prime Minister. in which he likened the rapid change taking place in the world into a culture. And it got a lot of attention. They also noticed that nostalgia for the past is not a strategy for the future. I think that's really important to note. So we'll begin our discussion here, and this is what he had to say.
It seems that every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must. And this aphorism of Thucydides is presented as inevitable, as the natural logic of international relations reasserting itself. And faced with this logic, there is a strong tendency for countries to go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety. Well, it won't. So what are our options? In 1978, the Czech dissident Václav Havel, later president, wrote an essay called The Power of the Powerless. And in it, he asked a simple question: how did the communist system sustain itself? And his answer began with a greengrocer. Every morning, the shopkeeper places a sign in his window: workers of the world unite. He doesn't believe it. No one does. But he places the sign anyway to avoid trouble, to signal compliance, to get along. And because every shopkeeper on every street does the same, the system persists. Not through violence alone, but through the participation of ordinary people in rituals they privately know to be false. Havel called this living within a lie. The system's power comes not from its truth, but from everyone's willingness to perform as if it were true. And its fragility comes from the same source. When even one person stops performing, when the greengrocer removes his sign, the illusion begins to crack. Friends, it is time for companies and countries to take their signs down. For decades, countries like Canada prospered under what we call the rules-based international order. We joined its institutions, we praised its principles, we benefited from its predictability. And because of that, we could pursue values-based foreign policies under its protection. We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partly false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically. And we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals. And we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination. The multilateral institutions on which the middle powers have relied, the WTO, the UN, the COP, the architecture, the very architecture of collective problem solving are under threat. And as a result, many countries are drawing the same conclusions, that they must develop greater strategic autonomy in energy, food, critical minerals, in finance, and supply chains. and this impulse is understandable. A country that can't feed itself, fuel itself, or defend itself has few options. When the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. But let's be clear-eyed about where this leads. A world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable. And there's another truth. If great powers abandon even the pretense of rules and values for the unhindered pursuit of their power and interests, the gains from transactionalism will become harder to replicate. Hegemons cannot continually monetize their relationships. Allies will diversify to hedge against uncertainty. They'll buy insurance, increase options in order to rebuild sovereignty. Sovereignty that was once grounded in rules, but will increasingly be anchored in the ability to withstand pressure. This room knows this is classic risk management. Risk management comes at a price. But that cost of strategic autonomy, of sovereignty, can also be shared. Collective investments in resilience are cheaper than everyone building their own fortresses. Shared standards reduce fragmentations. Complementarities are positive sum. And the question for middle powers like Canada is not whether to adapt to the new reality. We must. The question is whether we adapt by simply building higher walls or whether we can do something more ambitious. Now, Canada was amongst the first to hear the wake-up call, leading us to fundamentally shift our strategic posture. Canadians know that our old comfortable assumptions that our geography and alliance memberships automatically conferred prosperity and security, that assumption is no longer valid. And our new approach rests on what Alexander Stubb, President of Finland, has termed value-based realism. Or to put another way, we aim to be both principled and pragmatic. Principled in our commitment to fundamental values, sovereignty, territorial integrity, the prohibition of the use of force except when consistent with the UN Charter, and respect for human rights. And pragmatic in recognizing that progress is often incremental, that interests diverge, that not every partner will share all of our values. So we're engaging broadly, strategically with open eyes. We actively take on the world as it is, not wait around for a world we wish to be. We are calibrating our relationships so that depth reflects our values. And we're prioritizing broad engagement to maximize our influence, given the fluidity of the world at the moment, the risks that this poses, and the stakes for what comes next. And we are no longer just relying on the strength of our values, but also the value of our strength. We are building that strength at home. Since my government took office, we have cut taxes on incomes, on capital gains, and business investment. We have removed all federal barriers to interprovincial trade. We are fast-tracking $8 trillion of investments in energy, AI, critical minerals, new trade corridors, and beyond. We're doubling our defense spending by the end of this decade, and we're doing so in ways that build our domestic industries. And we are rapidly diversifying abroad. We've agreed a comprehensive strategic partnership with the EU, including joining SAFE, the European Defence Procurement Arrangements. We have signed 12 other trade and security deals on 4 continents in 6 months. The past few days, we've concluded new strategic partnerships with China and Qatar. We're negotiating free trade pacts with India, ASEAN, Thailand, Philippines, and Mercosur. We're doing something else. To help solve global problems, we're pursuing variable geometry. In other words, different coalitions for different issues based on common values and interests. So in Ukraine, we're a core member of the Coalition of the Willing and one of the largest per capita contributors to its defense and security. On Arctic sovereignty, we stand firmly with Greenland and Denmark and fully support their unique right to determine Greenland's future. Our commitment to NATO's Article 5 is unwavering. So we're working with our NATO allies, including the Nordic Baltic 8, to further secure the alliance's northern and western flanks, including through Canada's unprecedented investments in over-the-horizon radar, in submarines, in aircraft, and boots on the ground. Boots on the ice. Canada strongly opposes tariffs over Greenland and calls for focused talks to achieve our shared objectives of security and prosperity in the Arctic. On plurilateral trade, we're championing efforts to build a bridge between the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the European Union, which would create a new trading bloc of 1.5 billion people. On critical minerals, we're forming buyers clubs anchored in the G7 so the world can diversify away from concentrated supply. And on AI, we're cooperating with like-minded democracies to ensure that we won't ultimately be forced to choose between hegemons and hyperscalers. This is not naive multilateralism, nor is it relying on their institutions. It's building coalitions that work, issues by issue, with partners who share enough common ground to act together. In some cases, this will be the vast majority of nations. What it's doing is creating a dense web of connections across trade, investment, and culture on which we can draw for future challenges and opportunities. Argue the middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. But I'd also say that great powers can afford for now to go it alone. They have the market size, the military capacity, and the leverage to dictate terms. Middle powers do not. But when we only negotiate bilaterally with a hegemon, we negotiate from weakness. We accept what's offered. We compete with each other to be the most accommodating. This is not sovereignty. It's the performance of sovereignty while accepting subordination. In a world of great power rivalry, the countries in between have a choice. Compete with each other for favor, or to combine to create a third path with impact. We shouldn't allow the rise of hard power to blind us to the fact that the power of legitimacy, integrity, and rules will remain strong if we choose to wield them together. Which brings me back to Hal. What does it mean for middle powers to live the truth? Well, first, it means naming reality. Stop invoking rules-based international order as though it still functions as advertised. Call it what it is, a system of intensifying great power rivalry where the most powerful pursue their interests using economic integration as coercion. It means acting consistent, applying the same standards to allies and rivals. When middle powers criticize economic intimidation from one direction but stay silent when it comes from another, we are keeping the sign in the window. It means building what we claim to believe in. Rather than waiting for the old order to be restored, it means creating institutions and agreements that function as prescribed. And it means reducing the leverage that enables coercion. That's building a strong domestic economy. It should be every government's immediate priority. And diversification internationally is not just economic prudence, it's a material foundation for honest foreign policy. Because countries earn the right to principled stands by reducing their vulnerability to retaliation. So Canada has what the world wants. We are an energy superpower. We hold vast reserves of critical minerals. We have the most educated population in the world. Our pension funds are amongst the world's largest and most sophisticated investors. In other words, we have capital, talent. We also have a government with immense fiscal capacity to act decisively. And we have the values to which many others aspire. Canada is a pluralistic society that works. Our public square is loud, diverse, and free. Canadians remain committed to sustainability. We are a stable and reliable partner in a world that is anything but. A partner that builds and values relationships for the long term. And we have something else. We have a recognition of what's happening and a determination to act accordingly. We understand that this rupture calls for more than adaptation. It calls for honesty about the world as it is. We are taking the sign out of the window. We know the old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. But we believe that from the fracture, we can build something bigger, better, stronger, more just. This is the task of the middle powers. The countries that have the most to lose from a world of fortresses and the most to gain from genuine cooperation. The powerful have their power. But we have something too. The capacity to stop pretending, to name reality, to build our strength at home, and to act together. That is Canada's path. We choose it openly and confidently, and it is a path wide open to any country willing to take it with us. Thank you very much.
How do you do it? It's surprising that Canada is such a well-spoken, articulate leader. You know where you're.
Right, I mean, this was unexpected. Got a lot of attention, maybe not so much here, but it got a lot of attention around the world, as the rupture address, and I think that was appropriate. Because it framed things in a different way. It looked at things the way yeah, did he make an effective case? I would say yeah, he did. Do we need to take the sign out of the window, so to speak? I mean, is the world coming back? No, it's different. The collective architecture of problem solving is under threat. Yeah, I think that's easy. What should we do? Then how do we respond? Those are the decisions that are the conversations that are taking place in capitals around the world since that speech, and even including today. One commentator said, bookmark this so you can tell your grandchildren this is when the world changed. I thought that was kind of appropriate. Another said the Carney starkly described the end of Pax Americana. Really speaks to why we're here today, doesn't it? You know, what is he trying to say? Trying to say, pay attention, right? Trying to say, look up. That's really hard in today's world, isn't it? To look up. Because where are we spending most of our time? We're spending most of our time on these things, right? Yeah. I asked a media class that I taught last week. I said, what's the first thing you did when you got up? I looked at this. Okay. How long did you spend looking at that? And they said 10, 15 minutes. What did you find? Nothing. So could you spend that 15 minutes doing something else? Well, yeah, but if I don't look, I don't know what I'm going to miss. So, and that's kind of the challenge of our time, right? How do you get people to look up? How do you get people to pay attention? Right? Already tried. Did he succeed? Well, we don't know. And so we look at the past to try to get us some answers to what's going on in the future, right? You know, the past is prologue, but history can provide us some lessons as to what is going on. And I thought it was appropriate to, we mentioned Pax Americana, that we actually remember where this actually started.
When you describe it to a friend, this is how website creation should be. express.
Technology is great till it's not. Excuse me for a sec.
So what do you see an idea in the moment? And changes, because
What kind of peace do I mean, and what kind of peace do we see? Not Pax Americana, enforced in the world by American weapons of war, not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time. I speak of peace, therefore, as the necessary, rational end of rational men. I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears, but we have no more urgent task. Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again. And if we cannot end now our difference, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal.
That goes in what Kennedy said and what Carney said, isn't it? Did seem that both messages were speaking to the same thing, a changing world order, didn't it? 60 years ago. 60 years ago. Yeah. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does echo. Let's pull on that string a little bit. Kennedy's speech was given in June of 63. We all know what happened in November of 63. Challenging time, as some of you who are around can attest. I know you guys were all like in kindergarten, if that, right? Kennedy's speech wasn't received well here in the States. In fact, the White House got more letters at the time about a farm bill than it got about this speech. But the farm bill has faded into history, and this is still important. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev loved the speech. In fact, he ordered a translation published in Pravda so that the Soviet people could read it. Unprecedented at the time, right? Looking back, perhaps not surprising, one might think. After all, this speech came after the Cuban Missile Crisis. You know, in October 62, perhaps the closest the world had come, and perhaps had ever come to nuclear war. But that changed. So we fast forward to 60 years to Carney in June or in January at Davos. He made clear the world has changed, that our comfortable ways of global politics are not coming back, that those who want to wait for sanity to return are going to be waiting a long time. Yeah, he said that we're in a world increasingly shaped by the threat and use of hard power, and that all must accept that reality. and the line that got some chuckles there, as you saw. If we're, nations are not at the table, then we're on the menu. And that's really, really quite true, isn't it? Carney characterized the world order, something that wants to find by its hypocrisy, not as so much by rule. He acknowledged that countries like Canada benefited from that system, which rules are applied unevenly. And we see this in the UN Security Council. Who has a veto? United States, Russia. Yeah, so the challenge of getting something done there is hard. And he clearly hoped a new system that can emerge. One that's more resilient to diverse and unpredictable threats, but also one that's more honest and just. And I think if we look at what we want for our children, our grandchildren, we want a system that's just. We want a system that's honest, a system that takes into account differing opinions and not just the opinions of the most powerful, right? We want that. And there are other perspectives. And I know some of you may have read in the Great Decisions magazine, the article from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who what he said is not too terribly different than what Carney said, which seems to be at odds with the school of thought. But he told the Institute of International Finance that the imbalance of trade has been a problem. Been a problem for a long time, and how previous administrations have failed to act. He claimed that the inaction is forcing the Trump administration to rebalance global commerce. It's necessary because the growing balances are unstable. Yeah, just look at this country. We have a $38 trillion deficit. The biggest line item in the budget is interest on the debt. More than $1 trillion. What can we do with $1 trillion every year to do stuff? We could certainly get a lot done, couldn't we? And that's not sustainable. The secretary called out the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, for whistling past the graveyard. I could hear Carney say the same thing, right? By sharing what it wanted the world to be, not what it is. Okay. Comments are similar to what Carney said. He also said that success only comes with transparency, and everyone has a responsibility to create a system that serves the interests of the United States and all other participants. We could have ended it there, interests of the United States, but he didn't. He used all other participants. And I think that's important to know. All right, so Davos ended. Everybody went to the Olympics and watched the free figure skating challenge that was last night. Poor kid. Wasn't that awful? But now the world leaders are in Berlin for the annual Munich Security Conference. Got underway a few hours ago. It's really the world's leading forum on international security policy. And each year, the MSD brings together international decision makers and experts. So this is a clip from Ian Bremmer. He's considered a widely respected journalist on both sides of the aisle, political analyst. He was in Davos, got a lot of attention for his analysis of the various speeches. Now he's like, okay, what's going to happen in Europe? What's going to happen in Munich?
Hi, everybody. We're here live from the Munich Security Conference, just kicking off in blustery Munich, Germany, and blustery inside the conference center as well. You've got attendees from across the transatlantic alliance, and the theme this year is under destruction. Destruction coming principally from the United States itself. To what extent is the United States walking away
from the most powerful alliance that it itself anchored and set up over the course of the Cold War and beyond. The Europeans increasingly believing that the United States cannot be relied upon and is acting in an adversarial way. But there's a big difference between what the Europeans can do and will do economically and technologically to try to create their own set of rules, their own marching orders, and their own alignments that are more diversified from the United States. And I hear that, by the way, from every CEO that is here on the ground, those that are in the big security firms, the financial institutions that are them to do business in Europe, because there is that level of de-risking. They need to partner more aggressively with European firms, or else it's going to be challenging for them. I'm seeing all of that. That's very different from what can be done on the security side. And there, when Emmanuel Macron comes out and says the Americans want to destroy Europe, and Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, says, grow up, you've got no choice but working with the Americans. The truth is, of course, in between. The reality is that the United States continues to be the dominant military power. The U.S. is right now thinking about direct military strike, even decapitation strike against the supreme leader in Iran. And the Europeans have literally nothing to say about it. There's no one that would be capable of deterring President Trump if he took that decision, and there's no likely blowback from other countries, allies, or adversaries if he went ahead with it. That is very different than what happens if the Americans suggest they're going to put tariffs, for example, on European allies because they're not aligned with the Americans on Denmark or on Greenland. It's about power, it's about capability, it's about relevance, and it's about willingness to spend and to engage going forward. Now, the Europeans here are having a pre-summit, little castle, all talking about what they're going to actually do in response to this rupture. Everybody understands that the ability of the Europeans to act is a lot more constrained, it's a lot more diverse than the desire for them to be more competitive in response to the United States. A big part of that is spending money. The Germans are capable of acting outside of budgetary constraints, but no one else in Europe is. And the Germans aren't going to spend for the rest of Europe. That is, of course, something that they have to contend with because the Europeans are not a state. They don't operate like a state. The United States and China, of course, are. But this is going to be, I think, much more about concern of how difficult Europe's geopolitical position is, as opposed to a conference about how much Europe is capable of actually doing, at least in the near term. And the fact that there is a massive gap between those two things is going to exercise the Europeans going forward. If anything, what we learned from Mark Carney in Davos was that all of the European leaders and the transatlantic leaders outside the United States are taking the Americans seriously when they say America first, when they say unilateralism, when they say transactionalism, when they say the order isn't going to work the way that it has before. And recognizing a new global order of G0 absence of global leadership is the first step to responding to it. But recognition doesn't mean that you can respond to it. It also doesn't mean that Europeans will respond to it in a consistent and aligned fashion. And there is where I see Macron making big statements about the necessity of European autonomy, but not having either the political authority in his own country or the support across Europe to get that done. And I suspect the latter is going to be much more problematic, much more differentiated, and as a consequence, if there's any real takeaway from this summit so far, is that the Americans are showing up with the largest delegation that they've ever brought to the Security Conference. That level of we're going to do things the way we want. It's clear what that means for the Europeans. It's not clear yet how the Europeans respond. That's it for me. I'll talk to you later.
So a lot to unpack there, right? We're getting more and more complex, it seems, doesn't it? Bremer is a widely respected political scientist on both sides of the Atlantic. In Davos, he claimed the world is seeing a geopolitical recession. It's defined by deteriorating relations between the U.S. and its traditional allies, particularly the Europeans. China's rising. We forget China, don't we? Creating an alternative international political and economic architecture. He said the overall result is a fragmented approach to global governance, an increase in geopolitical risk, and a reduced ability to respond effectively to major international crises. All on the table in Munich. So what do? I mean, if we're running the world, and we'd like to, right? What do? How do you fix this? Do you just capitulate? Or do you fight back? And if you're Europe, what's on the menu here? So you have that kind of mindset going on in the world, and you have Marco Rubio, while you were sleeping, hopefully you all slept well, while you were sleeping, addressed the security conference. What do you think Rubio is going to say? Is he going to double down? Or is he going to extend a hand of friendship? What do you think?
He's going double down.
Yeah. What is he going to do? Well, we'll play his speech from just a couple of hours ago. So we try to stay as current as we can.
And that way, and we focus on making the post break. They really don't have to take them right every time.
Our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminders that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Because we know that the fate of Europe will never be irrelevant to our mind. National security, which this conference is largely about, is not merely a series of technical questions. How much we spend on defense or where, how we deploy it, these are important questions, they are. But they are not the fundamental one. The fundamental question we must answer at the outset is what exactly are we defending? Because armies do not fight for extraction. Armies fight for a people. Armies fight for a nation. Armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending. A great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history, confident of its future, and aims to always be the master of its own economic and political destiny. So it was here, in Europe, where the ideas that planted the seeds of liberty that changed the world were born. It was here, in Europe, where which gave the world the rule of law, the universities, and the scientific revolution. It was this continent that produced the genius of Mozart and Beethoven, of Dante and Shakespeare, of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And this is the place where the vaulted ceilings of the Sistine Chapel and the towering spires of the great cathedral in Cologne, they testify not just to the greatness of our past, or to a faith in God that inspired these marvels. They foreshadow the wonders that await us in our future. But only if we are unapologetic in our heritage and proud of this common inheritance can we together begin the work of envisioning and shaping our economic and our political future. Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decade-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence. And the loss of our supply chain sovereignty was not a function of a prosperous and healthy system of global trade. It was foolish. It was a foolish but voluntary transformation of our economy that left us dependent on others for our needs and dangerously vulnerable to crisis. Mass migration isn't some fringe concern of little consequence. It was and continues to be a crisis which is transforming and destabilizing societies all across the West. Together, we can reindustrialize our economies and rebuild our capacity to defend our people. But the work of this new alliance should not be focused just on military cooperation and reclaiming the industries of the past. It should also be focused on together advancing our mutual interests and new frontiers, unshackling our ingenuity, our creativity, and the dynamic spirit to build a new Western century. Commercial space travel and cutting-edge artificial intelligence, industrial automation and flex manufacturing, creating a Western supply chain for critical minerals not vulnerable to extortion from other powers, and a unified effort to compete for market share in the economies of the global South. Together, we can not only take back control of our own industries and supply chains, we can prosper in the areas that will define the 21st century. But we must also gain control of our national borders. Controlling who and how many people enter our country, this is not an expression of xenophobia, it is not hate. It is a fundamental act of national sovereignty. And the failure to do so is not just an abdication of one of our most basic duties owed to our people. It is an urgent threat to the fabric of our society and the survival of our civilization itself. And finally, we can no longer place the so-called global order above the vital interests of our people and our nations. We do not need to abandon the system of international cooperation we offer, and we don't need to dismantle the global institutions of the old order that together we built. But these must be reformed. These must be rebuilt. For example, the United Nations still has tremendous potential to be a tool for good in the world. But we cannot ignore that today, on the most pressing matters before us, it is no answer and has played virtually no role. It could not solve the war in Gaza. Instead, it was American leadership that freed captives from barbarians and brought about a fragile truce. It has not solved the war in Ukraine. It took American leadership in partnership with many of the countries here today just to bring the two sides to the table in search of a still elusive peace. It was powerless to constrain the nuclear program of radical Shia clerics in Tehran. That required 14 bombs dropped with precision from American B-2 bombing. And it was unable to address the threat to our security from a narco-terrorist dictator in Venezuela. Instead, it took American special forces to bring this fugitive to justice. In a perfect world, all of these problems and more would be solved by diplomats and strongly worded resolutions. But we do not live in a perfect world. And we cannot continue to allow those who blatantly and openly threaten our citizens and endanger our global stability to shield themselves behind abstractions of international law which they themselves routinely violate. This is the path that President Trump and the United States have embarked upon. It is the path we ask you here in Europe to join us on. It is the path we have walked together before and hope to walk together again. For 5 centuries, before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding. Its missionaries, pilgrims, soldiers, explorers pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending out across the globe. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus, it was contracting. Europe was in ruins. Half of it lived behind an iron curtain, and the rest looked like it would soon follow. The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions and by anti-colonial uprisings that would transform the world and drape the red hammer and sickle across vast swaths of the map in the years to come. Against that backdrop, then as now, many came to believe that the West's age of dominance had come to an end, and that our future was destined to be a faint and feeble echo of our past. But together, our predecessors recognized that decline was a choice, and it was a choice they refused to make. This is what we did together once before. And this is what President Trump and the United States want to do again now, together with you. And this is why we do not want our allies to be weak, because that makes us weaker. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalize the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it. For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the well-managed decline. We do not seek to separate, but to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history. What we want is a reinvigorated alliance that recognizes that what has ailed our society is not just a set of bad policies, but a malaise of hopelessness and complacency. An alliance the alliance that we want is one that is not paralyzed into inaction by fear. Fear of climate change, fear of war, fear of technology. Instead, we want an alliance that boldly races into the future. And the only fear we have is the fear of the shame of not leaving our nation prouder, stronger, and wealthier for our children. An alliance ready to defend our people, to safeguard our interests, and to preserve the freedom of action that allows us to shape our own destiny. Not one that exists to operate a global welfare state and atone for the purported sins of past generations. An alliance that does not allow its power to be outsourced, constrained, or subordinated to systems beyond its control. One that does not depend on others for the critical necessities of its national life. And one that does not maintain the polite pretense that our way of life is just one among many, and that asks for permission before it acts. And above all, an alliance based on the recognition that we, the West, have inherited together. What we have inherited together is something that is unique and distinctive and irreplaceable. Because this, after all, is the very foundation of the transatlantic bond. Acting together in this way, we will not just help recover a sane foreign policy. It will restore to us a clear sense of ourselves. It will restore a place in the world. And in so doing, it will rebuke and deter the forces of civilizational erasure that today menace both America and Europe alike. So in a time of headlights, heralding the end of the transatlantic era, let it be known and clear to all that this is neither our goal nor our wish. Because for us Americans, our home may be in the Western Hemisphere, but we will always be a child of Europe.
The game box scholar.
What do you think? Always the child of Europe. I'm gonna put this down and go back in.
Yeah, it just reminds me of do as I say and not as I do.
Well, but is there a bigger issue at play here? Is he positioning himself for 28?
Probably.
I don't think this is a political speech. I think this is a major change in direction. And we ought to appreciate it. Okay, what he's saying is a good thing. We are tied in Western Europe, always have been. Probably always will be. Okay, so that's what he's saying, and that's what we're doing.
So it could very well be, we don't know yet, right?
Yeah.
But the classes have full diplomas, they're going.
Well, that's Marco Rubio.
Correct.
That isn't down with the insults that President Trump leveled at Europe.
Yeah, and contrast that with what Jamie Vance said a year ago. Yes.
Right.
So apparently it's gonna change.
Totally different speed, right? Totally different reasons. And well,
European members of NATO have 660 million people. The Russians have 144 million people. They have 5 times almost the numbers. So why can't they defend themselves? They traditionally have not contributed 2% of their GNP to defense. Who makes up the difference? We do. And I'm tired.
And that is a perfectly valid opinion, because we have spent money where they've had opportunity to spend it in that. The challenge then becomes, what do we do? How do we restore the balance? This is President said. This is, as Rubio said, this is Trump has said, we need to recalibrate, right? We need to recalibrate, because it should be a more equal representation. They should be able to spend more. But you also look at what happened. There was a NATO training exercise in Ukraine 2 days ago. 10 Ukrainian soldiers took out 2 NATO battalions. The 10 soldiers and a whole bunch of drums, but that just speaks to the, are they being equipped? Are they being trained? What happened? So 660 million, yeah. But are they a paper tiger, or are they a valid fighting force? And whose responsibility is that?
It's theirs.
Is it their responsibility? Yeah. NATO exists as a collective, right? But do we have to spend all of our the United States as a citizen of the United States, we have to spend our money defending Luxembourg? Yeah. That's a decision made that smarter people than me have to make.
It's just like if you have a teenager, sooner or later you have to kick them out of the house.
Right. And then the school of thought is you fight, you arm the Ukraine there, so you have to fight the Russians with your kids later. And that's a reasonable, there are, as President Trump said, there are reasonable voices on both sides. Getting back there.
Could it be that, Rubio obviously is the 28, but obviously on the beach, but could it be that we're backing down a little bit because we are seeing that Europe is going ahead with all these free trade agreements all of a sudden with other countries, and maybe we're realizing we fractured a little bit too much because America, they've been working 30 years on something. Another one is they're going to work for 20 years with that something. Does it have a little bit to do with trade? Indirectly, and this is a good question.
And just in the last 21 hours, China has signed a humanitarian aid package with Ukraine.
Where the US used to be and are not anymore, the border by China. USAID and other goodwill that those things did. It's gone now for the Chinese saying, hey, there's an opportunity.
It's messaging, not even my book of messaging, but if the message is goal, somebody has to tell this other boy, have you guys been
Yeah, this is Rubio saying it's not Rubio, who knows what they want. This speech is in reaction to the fact that the European leaders said, okay, they're going to kiss it back in here. They don't think it's going to be like that, we're going to go ahead. The price we paid for being the big dog was that we paid the bill. We're not paying the bill.
then what's gonna happen? It's the old, now that the dog has got the car, what happens? Right. What do you do now? Yes,
I wasn't a teenager when Kennedy gave the speech at American University. I was an astronomer's wife. We lived in the Washington DC area. And I don't remember the speech at the time, but it very well saved a nuclear war that may have destroyed the world. I didn't realize until reading it later how close we came to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I don't remember in the news that we ever heard that we took our missile Turkey were within range of Russia, of the Soviet Union, in exchange. Anyway, but hey, I don't think nuclear war. I mean, people don't seem to be afraid of it as they used to be. And then I keep thinking about the founding documents of our country. So where does it say that 4% of the world's people are supposed to run the rest of it? And I thought the importance of balance of power after the fall of the split up of the Soviet Union, there was no balance of power. And the United States empire is on the decline, and they tend to get really neat before they
Reagan, in an address to the United Nations, he said it's not the desire of the United States to run the world. We could have after World War II, but we chose not to.
well, we kind of did. We base military bases around the world, made people. I mean, and that cost the poor people here. Yeah, the tax money wasn't going to help the people. And when diplomatic, I mean, hey, I remember the story in reading books when I was a kid. Fables or something about the sun and the wind. It's like being kind is a lot cheaper and it works better, but the people who profit off of war don't like it.
Yeah, and you mentioned the human, we forget, and this is, you know, this is a whole of education. We don't talk about the name of Philly Art Pump. And if that name doesn't sound familiar, that is a failure of media, the failure of education. The Philly Art Pump was a commander on the submarine. He was one of 3 people that was asked to turn the key. And he said, no. And that kept the Russians who had, or the Russians, the Soviets, who had nuclear devices on their submarines around Cuba from launching a weapon that would change the future of the world. He said no. Because he had been in a nuclear accident a few years prior, he knew the impact of that. And he said no. And that didn't come out for a number of years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. It came out at a reunion between Soviet and American people that were in that theater during that time. And you know, so history doesn't do a good job sometimes of sharing those things, but only let me recycle this and then get to you. Yeah.
There seems to be another curve. There seems to be an undercurrent there that he's suggesting that this association with Europe was based on culture of a very particular type, and that the future was to be that culture, which was decidedly not admitting any people of a different culture.
Yeah,
That.
yeah, and we did exactly, but there certainly that's still a lot. when we talk about Germany, right? The Germans are an interesting part of this debate. They're the most prosperous nation in Europe right now, right? Without a doubt. Article in the March edition of Foreign Affairs, which dropped in my inbox yesterday, warns of the perils of German power. After many delays, this author writes that Germany's 2022 promise to become one of Europe's defense leaders is finally becoming a reality. Well, that's a good thing, right? 2025, Germany spent more on defense than any other European country in absolute terms, right? Military budget today ranked fourth in the world. Yeah. Just beyond, just after Russia. You get me wound up, I come back there and then I don't have the microphone because I don't like to be tethered. Today's Germany is pledged to use its outside armed power to help all of Europe. Left unchecked, German military dominance might eventually foster divisions within the continent. France remains uneasy about the fact that its neighbor is becoming a major military power. Should we be concerned? No. Worst case scenario, right? Because that's where former journalists, or I'm a former journalist, but where journalists default, competition might return. France, Poland, other states could attempt to counterbalance Germany, which would divert attention away from Russia and leave Europe divided and vulnerable. France, in particular, may seek to reassert itself as the continent's leading power and grand nation, right? Could prompt outward rivalry with Berlin and place Europe at odds with itself. That would never happen. No, that would never happen. These nightmarish outcomes become a little more in focus if Germany ends up being governed by AfD, group that's rising in the poll. It's an intensely nationalistic party. Long been critical of the European Union and NATO, and some of its members have made claims about territory in neighboring countries. We should get those territories back. AfD controlled Germany might use its power to bully or coerce other countries, leading to tension and conflict. So what is too much and what is not enough? That's really the question here. How much is too much when it comes to Germany? How much is not enough? Yeah. We could answer that question. We could be in Munich, right? We could understand that balance. The U.S. retreat from Europe with the competition that marked the first half of the 20th century there return. Why start in relatively small and harmless ways? Shared in the Foreign Affairs article, Berlin is planning to spend the lion's share of its defense budget on German defense companies, exploiting an exception to EU competition rules that allow member countries to skip notification and clearance procedures for the public funding of national defense industries when such spending is of essential security interest. This could undermine collaboration and make it difficult for true European defense industrial champions to emerge. France, Italy, Sweden, and others, they already take advantage of the same loophole, but we want to punish the Germans. No single nation can compete with Germany's resources. German policymakers argue that Germany's neighbors cannot have both a weak Berlin and a strong one to defend Europe. The attitude toward European elite seems to be that because the continent asks for the buildup, they don't get to complain about it. Fair? Maybe. Which side is right? This is the center of the New World Order debate, right? Who's going to do what to win to who? Set that down.
supposed to expect Russia to forget that Germany invaded them twice, causing world wars? I mean, this was the reason that the Soviet Union divided Germany after World War II. I didn't feel like I remember the end of World War II. When we went to school in Iowa and I was, hey, it's like, I didn't hear that. The reason the Soviet Union divided Germany was so it wouldn't become a great power and invade everybody else again.
And in 1989, Margaret Thatcher was born again. Yeah. My family's part German. They're part Ukrainian. Well, I say my wife's side. Her grandmother was born in Nepal. So she's got skin in the game. She married a German guy.
And don't forget also, the Germans have long memories too. And Russia invaded Germany in World War I. Now, Germans, we all blame World War I on Germany. They had less to do with it than say Austria did, and Serbia, and Russia, who could have stopped their mobilization and didn't. So yeah, I don't blame the Germans for worrying about the Russians.
And we forget it, it's hard to burn it and turn left instead of right. World War I was exactly.
You see how much different right now.
Yeah, one little pivot point, makes such a difference. It is hard to figure out where we're going. Yes, ma'am.
There were a lot of good points, but what bothered me was he recognized Europe and our ties and our past of people that have contributed. And then his next sentence was shutting the doors and not letting people into the United States. And I think that that's wrong. We need the good people. We're sending people away from us, international students, professors, scientists. They're being forced out of our country. And I think that, yes, immigration is a problem. We want our borders safe. But we can't shut the doors and not let anyone in them, because then we're alone. We're not part of the world if we don't have connections with all the countries, if we don't share our ideas back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, this is a school, immigration is fine until but it has to be done properly. It has to be done by the rules. It can't just be done, willy-nilly, and that's an issue. All right, so you guys are on the leading edge of this. How many of you think that this is even going to?
What it's feeding you, yeah.
And if so, how's it gonna be triggered? Is that? I mean, you're gonna, you can screw the journalist, because I used to be, so don't feel upset. Don't pick on the journalist. But, is that part of the problem? The stories aren't getting out unless you're looking for them. I mean, I would have to suggest that a lot of you didn't know the meeting to do account was going on. That was what's going on. These were the decisions. More. Yeah, I think the story. There's not going to be you're going to get too young to interpretation of what you said, and that is one of our problems here. We don't want to listen to one side, and it's that so yeah. Desire, and do we? No, we like. Yeah, we want to be, we want our belief to be affirmed, don't we? Whatever we believe, we'll go to that outlet because we want affirmation that what we're thinking is right.
But we don't learn anything if we don't hear the other side. Only that we see the evidence and miss the evidence, even if it's right in front of our eyes. We automatically, we're programmed, we evolve to see what we already agree with. It's quicker, and we don't even see the evidence, even if it's right in front of us.
You guys are gonna have it on what you did.
I can. Back in the 70s when I took the journalism classes, the professor was adamant. Every media has a bias. You have to understand, but most people, oh no, this is all there is. This is the truth. They told us everything there is to know. You have to understand when you're looking at any information outlet, they have a bias. Rupert Murdoch has an agenda. And so you need to take that into account when you see things on TV. Consider, well, what is their bias? What is their push?
Even this, foreign affairs article has bias. You can feel it. And what we need to do, I think, where we can, is becoming more media literate. And helping those within our circle to become more media literate, because these are the issues that we have. You know, it's not hinge. The hinge of the history, what?
No, it's just that the city is saying about, social media and even our news feeds is they're going to only give us the side we want. And that's actually, I think most of the street has made things work. Of that algorithm.
We do what the algorithms tell us to do.
Because of what we've seen before.
Right.
They know what we know.
One way to get out of the algorithm bubble is to look at different outlets, because then the algorithm is like, wait a minute, I thought you were over here, but you're looking over here. So you have to look at both sides. What would it be? You know,
There's one that will-
It's all about money. Let's just face it. Take a look here locally. PDF is going off the air here, the WBTU. What is money?
follow the money. That's why I tell my students, always follow the money. Because that's where the answer is, right? Always follow the money. All right. One last slide and then we'll open up for questions. Where did you leave it? Yeah. We didn't even touch on South America. We didn't touch on Venezuela. We didn't touch on China, Taiwan. Yeah. You know, a lot of challenges facing the world. Don't be discouraged. Yeah, we look at the lens, we have empty, the glass is half full, we can work out the full again. Right? Yeah, but this is at a pinch, right? It makes us dependent to turn away from our phone. Or cat videos and engage. We have to engage. Look up. American Undersecretary of Defense. He's Undersecretary of Defense, not Undersecretary of War, because it's not officially changed. Elder Scobie said, these realities compel us to think clearly, soberly, and realistically about how we defend ourselves and how we do so together in a way that is sustainable, sensible, and enduring. He went on to say, times have changed, and it's only prudent that we adapt to meet that. And regardless of your politics, that's not a bad way to look at it. Gotta be able to adapt. Gotta be able to change. Gotta be able to understand what's going on. And we have to look up. We have to look up. You know, and we don't do a very good job. And talk to them. have conversations with, especially those people in which we don't agree. Because they're out there. And they will be privately engaged. Right?
Well, that last statement, times have changed and it's only prudent that we adapt to meet them. Makes me think of the, quote or the topic that Marco Rubio indicated that we need to go back to the industries of the past. Is that what he said? And what are those industries? I think of oil and coal, things that we may have wanted to adapt away from. He also indicated that we should not operate out of a fear of climate change. And if it's not a fear, it's at least a reality that we need to adapt to meet. And it seems that we're in contradiction about that if we're moving away from some sustainable energy options and going back to other things that seem not to be so good for us as humans and for the environment.
Do you make decisions based on fear and emotion, or do you make decisions based on fact?
Well, everyone who agrees, I mean, we all agree with that.
Yeah. And do we know? Are the facts consistent? Are the facts consistent?
We don't get back because.
Because we might get an error where you have one that, you have one that, you have one.
Facts.
Yeah. Like you're back to that, right? Yeah. Right, good morning.
The difference between the US and where democracy and China is definitely not. And they have a longer point than they
That is a whole other. Or other.
They don't have no lobbyists in China.
They turn out more engineers and they turn out more attorneys.
But the problem, the pretty place is for
But not.
So, all right. Time for one final question, comment. Yeah.
Rubio in his speech said godless comments. And that was how McCarthyism turned the people against socialism and America. And no economic system is religious. No, there's no God in the United States Constitution. They rally around people who are busy and suffering that could benefit from some programs to help everybody. You know, it's like, and so it may because it rallies people around there. And I hadn't heard that for a while, but I know he stuck it in there. Yeah, this is McCarthyism all over again, except it was more often than.
Yeah, this week in my comparative democracy class at Adrian, we touched the topic of religion and democracy. You know, does religion support democracy, democracy support religion, you know, all those arguments that we never share, we share. And after it was over, I said, "Whoa, what it on?" They're like. I'm like, that was it. So, thank you all.